You hear about it all the time on the news, right? The government budget. It sparks these huge debates, and it affects pretty much everything, from our paychecks to our national parks. But why? Why does it cause so much fighting year after year? Well, let's break it down.
Okay, picture this. You've been planning this amazing trip for ages. You finally make it all the way out to Yellowstone. You're ready to see Old Faithful, and you pull up to the gate, and it's locked. The entire park is just shut down. How frustrating would that be? Well, this isn't a hypothetical. It actually happened to thousands of people back in October of 2013.
So, what was the reason? A massive wildfire? A blizzard? Nope. The U.S. federal government was in the middle of a shutdown. See, Congress and the president were in a total gridlock. They just could not agree on a budget. So a political fight happening hundreds of miles away in Washington, D.C. literally closed one of America's greatest treasures. And that right there, that shows you just how high the stakes really are.
All right, so to understand all the fighting, we first have to follow the money. Let's crack open the government's wallet and see what's inside. When you boil it all down, it's really about two simple things: what comes in and what goes out.
First up, let's look at spending. Where does all the money go? You might be surprised to learn that just four things, make up about 60% of the entire federal budget. We're talking healthcare programs, Social Security, national defense, and just the interest we pay on the national debt. Everything else? I mean everything. From funding national parks, to education, to fixing our roads, all of that has to get crammed into what's left over.
So, where does all that cash come from in the first place? Well, overwhelmingly, it comes from us, you and me. Individual income taxes and payroll taxes, the stuff that comes out of our paychecks, that makes up over 85% of all the money the government brings in. Corporate taxes and other bits and pieces make up a much, much smaller slice of the pie. Okay, so we've got money coming in and money going out. But what happens when more money goes out than comes in? This brings us to two of the most confused and mixed up terms in all of economics: the deficit and the debt. Let's clear this up once and for all. The key difference here is all about the time frame. A deficit, that's a one-year thing. It's what happens when the government spends more than it collects in a single fiscal year. It's a shortfall for just that year. The debt, on the other hand, is the grand total. It's the sum of all those past deficits added together over the years, all the money borrowed that hasn't been paid back yet.
Here's a really easy way to think about it: a college loan. Let's say you borrowed $10,000 for your freshman year. That's your deficit for that year, 10 grand. But after 4 years of doing that, your total accumulated debt is $40,000. The government's budget works pretty much the exact same way, just with a whole lot more zeros at the end.
Now, the budget isn't just some boring accounting exercise. No way. It's actually the government's #1 tool for trying to steer the entire economy. You can think of it like a car. It's got a gas pedal to speed things up and a brake pedal to slow them down. And this whole concept has a name: fiscal policy.
Yeah, fiscal policy sounds kind of fancy and academic, but all it really means is using government spending and taxes to nudge the economy in one direction or another. So what does that actually look like in practice? Let's get back to those gas and brake pedals.
So when the economy is struggling, when it's in a recession, the government hits the gas. This is called expansionary policy. They can do this in a couple ways. They can cut taxes, which leaves more money in our pockets to spend. Or they can directly boost government spending on things like new roads or bridges. The goal is always the same: increase what economists call aggregate demand, which is really just total spending in the economy, and get things moving again to create jobs. Those stimulus checks that went out a while back, a perfect textbook example of hitting the gas.
But what about the opposite problem? What if the economy is overheating and prices are rising way too fast? Well, that's inflation. And in that case, the government needs to gently tap the brakes. This is called contractionary policy. And the actions are, you guessed it, the exact opposite. They can raise taxes or cut back on government spending. The idea is to reduce overall demand and cool the economy down to get inflation under control. Now, in theory, this all sounds pretty straightforward, doesn't it? Economy's in a slump, hit the gas. Inflation's a problem, tap the brake. But in the real world, it's incredibly difficult. And this is the real reason we see all the political fighting. So, time for a reality check.
There are a few huge real-world problems. First, there are time lags. It takes a long time to even realize there's an economic problem, and then it takes even longer for Congress to debate and pass a bill. By the time they actually act, the economy might have already changed. Then there's a concept called crowding out. When the government borrows massive amounts of money, it can actually drive up interest rates, making it more expensive for you to get a car loan or for a small business to expand. And finally, there's just plain old politics. Come on, let's be real. Hitting the gas with tax cuts and new spending projects is almost always going to be more popular with voters than hitting the brakes.
You know, this quote from a former Treasury Secretary, George P. Shultz, just perfectly captures this whole conflict. He said that economists get that policies take time to work. They understand the lags. But politicians, they live and die by instant results. And that tension, that gap between the slow pace of economics and the fast pace of politics, that's the nightmare. And it explains so much of the debate we see every day.
Which brings us to the final, really big question here. With all these challenges, should we just force the government to balance its budget every single year, no matter what? Some people argue for exactly that, and it sounds responsible, right? But think about what that would mean. It would mean taking away the gas pedal. In the middle of a bad recession, the government wouldn't be able to step in to help, which could make a bad downturn much, much worse. It is the central trade-off in this entire budget debate, and it is exactly why the fighting is pretty much guaranteed to continue.